Hey everyone, welcome back to POL 701 Techniques of Political Science Research. This week I have three lecture videos for you. The first one is the longest one and we'll talk all about introducing R in RStudio, and I'm going to show you how to work with RStudio Cloud. In the second video, I'm going to talk about reproducible research with R Markdown and knitr. That's something that I already mentioned last week as well as in our Q&A session, and I'm going to show you using the example of the first assignment of how you can set up your first R Markdown document. And then in the last video, I'm going to talk briefly about additional resources that are available to you, specifically using the swirl package as well as the QSS Learn R package, which allows you to go through a lot of the content in the book as well as in the lecture in more detail in a kind of interactive tutorial. So let's jump right into it. This video is going to be an introduction to R. And before we get started, I just briefly want to talk about why we're using R in this class. In general, as I mentioned before, R is an open source statistical programming environment, which means it is free and open source. Anyone can download it and can use it. That has great advantages. On the one hand, it's free for you to use, and on the second hand, it is also there is a great big community of users who contribute new functions, new packages, and things like that. So that's a great advantage of using R, because there's a lot of people in social science, but also beyond, who use this environment as well and who are providing code for other people. Due to the fact that there's such a large community who's using R and RStudio, you'll have access to pretty much all state-of-the-art statistics, new developments, new packages, new methods that are being developed usually come with R packages. Beyond that, both base R and additional packages that we'll talk about later in the semester provide the whole environment with a great set of visualization capabilities. We'll talk a lot about how to plot data and distributions and things like that, and how to visualize your results throughout the semester. And compared to other software packages, R has a really impressive set of visualization capabilities. So that makes it another very attractive choice. It's also, some of you have some prior experience with other software packages like Stata or SPSS or even SAS. And R is faster and more efficient than these packages, and is also more versatile in the types of data that it can handle ultimately. Because R is not only an environment that allows you to work with one data set like Stata or SPSS, but essentially it's a fully fledged programming language that can interface with other powerful languages, for example with Python or C++, to ultimately tackle much more complex tasks than what you could do, for example, using Stata or SPSS. So overall, as I mentioned, R is becoming more and more widespread, both in academia but also in the industry. So if you're thinking about jobs in like market research or in analytics positions and things like that, then having a good grasp of statistical programming, and particularly using R, will help you on the job market as well. So it's really a useful skill to have, whether you want to stay in academia or pursue a career in the industry. I know that a lot of you don't really have a lot of experience with programming in general or with statistics in particular, and you might be worried about R having kind of a steep learning curve and being difficult to learn. And of course there is a little bit of a learning curve, but one thing to say is that to some extent all programming languages have somewhat of a steep learning curve, but it's certainly an investment that ultimately pays off, right? So even though, you know, some certain aspects might be frustrating at times, I really hope that you'll be motivated to kind of like push through, because ultimately it will definitely pay off. And it's not that programming itself is just inherently difficult. Ultimately, it's just about kind of endurance and just practicing and going through problems, and that's a lot of what we'll do throughout the semester. And ultimately, in the end, I'm sure you'll have a lot of great experience. I guess one of the backgrounds compared to like Stata or SPSS or packages that you might have used in the past, R does have kind of a steeper learning curve. Part of the reason for that is that it's open source, as I mentioned, so it's, you know, kind of, there's a lot of people who contribute packages. So it's not kind of a standalone software package that you can just download and use off the shelf, but there's a lot of kind of additional packages that you might have to install and to kind of get everything running. So as I mentioned, compared to other packages, commercial packages like Stata or SPSS, it can be a little bit more difficult to learn. Also because you have to kind of master a broader variety of concepts that are unique to object-oriented languages. So compared to Stata or SPSS, R has the capability to handle different types of objects rather than just working on one specific, you know, large data frame. And that comes with a lot of advantages, but it also makes handling the language a little bit more complex. But we'll get through it. We'll figure it out, and we'll have a lot of time practicing these concepts. So in general, these basic concepts in the beginning may seem somewhat irrelevant to your work right now, but I promise you that they will become extremely useful later throughout the semester and also throughout your studies and your career, because most of the types of analysis in R and in social science in general are more complicated than they seem at first, and so it's really important to kind of get these basic concepts right. And in general, as we go through these examples and as I show you kind of this code and code examples, what I want you to focus on is not so much about kind of memorizing the syntax or specific facts about R. It's not about kind of, you know, learning specific commands by heart. You can always, you know, Google specific commands, or you can always look at help files. What is more important is that you focus on kind of the underlying principles and getting a general sense of how things work, and trying to kind of think of how the underlying program works, what the underlying data structures are, and how specific kind of commands work, more like from a conceptual perspective rather than just memorizing specific commands. Because you can always look up the details, you know, online through various resources. Okay. So let's take a first look at RStudio Cloud. I'm gonna click on this link real quick, and as you will see, if you now log on to RStudio Cloud, as I mentioned, you should have the link to join our shared workspace on Canvas. And if you join, this should look something like this. I, by now, uploaded 2 separate projects on RStudio Cloud. One is here, O2 Introduction, which contains all the code for the slides that I'm going to present in the upcoming next couple, or in the videos for this week. And then there's the problem set due September 22nd, so a week from now, and you can access those by clicking on those, and you can copy them and then work on them yourself. You get all the code that I show here. You can directly run it. I would recommend you watching the videos ultimately, and then as you watch the videos at the same time, kind of run the code. Maybe I'll click on this right away and open this to give you an idea of how this looks. And maybe pause the video every now and then and just run the code that I show you, and then potentially as you go through it, maybe play around with it a little bit. All right. This is now loading. I hope this is working well. This will take a little bit of time. All right, so for those of you who have not worked with RStudio or RStudio Cloud at all before, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what you're seeing. In RStudio Cloud, you have, or in RStudio in general, if you install the program on your computer, it will look exactly like this, just you won't access it through your browser. There are 4 different panels and 4 different windows in RStudio that have different purposes. Okay. On the lower left here, we have the console, which is where all the output of our commands will show up. Okay. And I'll show that in a second. So for example, if I can type in commands straight right away here. So for example, if I type in 2 plus 3, it will give you an output of 5. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger so you can see it a little bit better. Maybe this. Maybe even a little bit bigger. Okay. All right, I hope this works. All right, so this is the output console. We have on the lower right, we have a little browser or a little overview of the files that are in our current working directory. And in our case, we have an R file, introduction.r. We have a folder called data, which if you click on it, you'll see that we'll have some data sets stored here. Let's go back up. And we have notes and project.rproj. We don't have to focus on these for now. The important one is o2 introduction.r. If we open this file, and in fact this file is actually already opened, it'll be opened up here on the upper left panel. This is where we can work on our scripts. All right, so here we have o2 introduction.r open. And this is now a script that contains all the commands that we can run in RStudio Cloud, and that will ultimately be then where the output will then be shown in the console that I showed you. Let me just turn on something real quick so you'll see what kind of buttons I press. So as we go through the lines here in our console, you can either select a line and then click here on run to run this specific command, and you'll see 5 plus 3 is 8. Shouldn't be too surprising. Oopsie. But we can also run this command by just pressing Control and Enter, and it'll do the same thing. Okay. You can also select multiple lines, Control Enter, and then we'll see all 3 lines of code being executed. There's an additional panel here in the upper right. This is your environment. This will show you all the objects that you created with your script or with commands that you run in the console. And you'll see this filling up as you go through the code that I show you in the lecture. One thing that I usually tend to do, this is the standard layout. The way I usually change this, and you may do that as well if you are so inclined, you can click up here to move the console to the right and the environment to the lower left. I like this view because it allows me to minimize both the kind of file browser and the environment and just focus on my script on the left and the output on the right. And this is how I'm going to show you most of the commands later. All right, so much for the introduction. As I mentioned, I'm going to go through some code. I think I'm going to split it up and do it in a separate video now. As I go through the code, you can kind of look at the script in parallel and run the code in your own instance in RStudio Cloud and directly kind of get some hands-on experience. So in the next video, I'm going to continue with some overview of arithmetic and some basic objects and how to use R. All right.